This podcast is brought to you by PLI, the Practicing Law Institute. PLI is committed to keeping you ever current on topics that matter to you, like artificial intelligence. Learn more at pli.edu/AIPod.
Welcome to AI in Data Law, part of the PLI Evercurrent podcast. I'm William Tanenbaum, host of the podcast and head of AI and data practice at Moses & Singer in New York. In this series, we bring you the latest perspectives on AI and data through timely talks with thought leaders working at the intersection of AI, data, and the law. In this episode, my guest is Bob Seiner, the president of KIK Consulting and Educational Services. Our topic is, what is data governance in law firms? Today we have a very honored guest. We have Bob Seiner, who's very well known among data professionals and particularly well known for constantly staying at the forefront of data governance with new techniques and new ways to do it as business evolves. And we're going to take a dive into what data governance really is. And before I ask Bob to kind of tell us about the highlights of his career, which will be an indirect way of showing how data governance has evolved, I'm just going to mention something that Bob taught me, which is that data does not manage itself. And without data managing itself, somebody must do it. And that's where Bob comes in. And then we're also going to touch a little bit on what data management in law firms looks like and what some of those issues are. So Bob, let's just kind of jump into your background. And, I'm just going to ask you for the highlights because your extensive experience will swallow the whole podcast.
Say, how much time do you have for the podcast?
I've done some data analytics on this. We have 4 minutes and 17 seconds.
I will be brief. So I graduated from college in the middle of the 80s, and there were a lot of students studying computer science at the time. So I have a computer science degree from the University of Pittsburgh. But it wasn't until a couple of years later, and I was a programmer, and that was what they taught you in schools that were teaching computer science back in the day. But that's changed a lot because these days they teach data science, they teach artificial intelligence, they teach data management. So when I was employed with a large insurance company, I read an article that changed the trajectory of my career. And the name of the article was Accountability to the Rescue. And it was written by a gentleman named Larry English. And he talked about how we could improve the quality and the management of data within our organizations if we could get people to be held formally accountable for what they did with the data. Like you said, the data will not manage itself. The data will not govern itself. So I looked into, the term was stewardship at the time, accountability to the rescue. He used the term stewardship. That has evolved into data governance. Organizations these days are focusing on data as an asset. You probably hear that all the time, but there's real misunderstanding as to what that even means.
I know you started a new engagement, a new company. So tell us a little bit about what that is, what it does, and who your typical engagements are with.
Well, when I left the corporate world, I started a company called KIK Consulting and Educational Services. And so before you ask if KIK are my initials, no, KIK are not my initials. People do ask that. KIK stands for Knowledge is King. So what I focus on is transferring best practice knowledge to my clients to help them. I basically get asked to help organizations to manage their data and information better, and through data governance and through non-invasive data governance. So KIK stands for Knowledge is King. If I use my initials, I would be called BS Consulting, and I didn't want to call myself that. I work with a lot of clients. They come to me most often because of the unique approach that I have to data governance. And the whole concept of non-invasive data governance focuses on the idea that organizations like law firms are already governing your data, but you're not doing it very formally. And because you're not doing it formally, there's a lot of inefficiencies and ineffectiveness in how you can define, produce, and use data within your organization. So again, the whole concept is to help people formalize how they go about managing their data within the organization.
So to understand non-invasive, you have to understand data governance as kind of a command and control structure. So kind of walk us through what the differences are.
So literally, there are three approaches to data governance in the world. Okay, so my definition of data governance is that it is the execution and enforcement of authority over the management of data and data-related assets. That's worded very strongly. My clients, for the most part, cringe when they hear that definition, and they temper it a little bit to be something less direct. But at the end of the day, you need to execute and enforce authority over the management of over the data.
Let me just ask, what does authority mean in this context?
Authority means having the ability to be able to make decisions instead of just being agreeing to disagree and not resolving anything. Authority means that somebody is in a position to be able to make decisions. And unless you can execute and enforce those decisions, they're not really valid within your organization.
And what's one example of one decision?
One decision is that everybody in the organization that uses sensitive data is going to be certified in their knowledge of how to protect sensitive data. So having the authority means that it's not an option. People can't opt into or opt out of stewardship. It's based on their relationship to the data. If they use data, they've got to use it correctly. The authority is what's telling them that they have to use it effectively.
And I do want to focus on kind of data in the law firm context. But before we do that, I'd like to have just an explanation from someone of your experience to give an outline to the audience of the different types of work that different data professionals do and a little meaning behind the terms that everyone's heard of, like data governance or data management or data integrity, whether they're relevant, what they mean, what they used to mean. Just give people kind of a topography of what data professionals do.
So that is evolving. That is constantly evolving, but it's evolving probably now more than ever. Traditionally, people who were people that were technical data people were database administrators. They were people that managed the actual data assets and made them available to people within the organization. Organizations are recognizing that data is becoming much more of a valuable asset, that they can use it for insights and analytics and predictive modeling and those types of things. And if you're just paying attention to making certain that the database is available, that's one aspect of it. But making sure that the data is trusted, that the people have confidence in the data, that they can find the data is extremely important. And those are the roles that now the data management roles are evolving, but then also the end user roles of data scientists and data analysts are evolving because the tools are becoming much more powerful.
So what's the difference between a CDO and a CAO, a chief data officer and a chief analytics officer?
Boy, I told you were going to ask questions that I don't always get, but actually I see it evolving into a chief data and analytics officer. So I don't see, organizations that have chief analytics officers, to me, they seem to be customers of the chief data officer, meaning that they're reliant on high quality, highly governed data that they can have confidence
in order to do
analytics. Right. And again, usually the chief analytics officers will not have responsibility for implementing formal governance and management practices. Again, they're going to be on the receiving end oftentimes.
All right. Now, I know that you've mentioned to me the term CGO, and that's a one step over the horizon term, but I'd like you to kind of explain that. I think it's kind of an interesting way of approaching where things stand today.
So, when I talk about non-invasive data governance, I say organizations are already governing, but they're not doing it very well. And organizations are governing from the C-level position in a lot of different parts of the organization. There's a chief information officer, potentially a chief data or chief data and analytics officer, a chief risk officer, a chief program management or project management officer even. These things are all forms of governance. And the idea of the chief governance officer is that somebody needs to connect the dots between what all these people are doing. They should not be governing in silos. They should be governing together. And that's where I'm thinking that maybe sometime in the future, there will be a role of a CGO, of a chief governance officer, because we got to make sure that information security and data management and data analytics and all these things are working in harmony with each other instead of as
Right.
independent exercises.
All right. And just tell us once more what data governance is.
So my definition of data governance is that data governance is the execution and enforcement of authority over the management of data. And so you can, the idea is to get people to do the right thing in the right way. I came up with something that I called the Data Governance Bill of Rights. And the word rights is in quotes. And that's getting the right people involved with the right data, with the right understanding at the right time to make the right decision, at least most of the time. So that's really, if you want to think about data governance in a nutshell, it's getting the right people involved with the data and making the right decisions and improving the quality of the data so people can use the data properly.
Okay. I think that's helpful for setting the stage in something that I think is a little new to people who think data might be a technology or might be part of the IT department. So I wanted to kind of bring that out. I'll just make one more aside. I think law firms, as their companies become more overtly data-centric and know that they are a greater awareness of how to strategically use data as an asset. Everybody now says all companies are technology companies, and pretty soon everyone's going to say all companies are data companies.
I was just going to say that. I was going to say law firms are data companies.
All right, let's go into that.
Okay.
Because I believe you had an engagement with a law firm. Is that right? And let's talk about that at just a high level, obviously. But let's pretend I approached you at that law firm. What was that law firm? Why did that law firm hire someone like you as opposed to some IT guy? What did they self-identify the problem as and their objectives in hiring?
So they recognized that they had a lot of challenges associated with the data that they used every single day. And they also recognized that, as going back to something that you said earlier, is that the data will not govern itself, that these challenges are not going to address themselves. But they had an IT area within the organization that focused a lot on making certain that the systems were available and that it had decent data in it. But they also needed to convince their upper management, their leadership, that these problems that we're having, these challenges that people are reporting every day, they're not going to resolve themselves. And the one firm asked me to help them to convince their executive leadership that nothing would change if they didn't take action. And so I came in and did an assessment of the organization to figure out what their preparedness, what their readiness was to actually move forward with implementing an effective program to manage their data and govern their data as an effective asset. One of the recommendations that came out of that assessment, just to add to that, was that they needed to have somebody in the organization that this was their responsibility.
So that sounds like a CDO.
Well, it wasn't. It was actually somebody a lot lower in the organization than a CDO, but it was somebody who was starting to put the foundational pieces of managing data across the firm into place. And this person was an incredible person to work with. They created centers of excellence and brought people together around certain domains of data within the practice to improve the quality of the data, to resolve the challenges and the issues that they had that they recognized would not be addressed unless somebody took it as an action.
So what are two examples of a domain of data?
A domain can be thought of as being a subject area. Okay, they're pretty much synonymous. So think about all the different areas of law that you practice in. They could be domains, but there's also domains such as customers and products and legal cases and things like that, that there's certain data that kind of falls under that subject area. That subject area would be a domain. And one of the biggest hurdles for organizations is to recognize who in the organization actually has that authority that we talked about to be able to make decisions associated with domains of data.
So far we've come to the conclusion that data doesn't manage or govern itself. And your last comments to me have driven home the importance of that, data is not antiseptic. You have to have people involved. And there's a heavy component, and this will all echo back with AI when we get to that. But, as far as bringing in leadership and getting people with certain authority in right positions, What I'm hearing, and you can correct, amplify, or comment, is that is part of putting a data organization on a solid footing.
The number one best practice associated with data governance and data management, at least from my experience, and it's been used 100% of the time with my clients, not 98%, 100%, is that senior leadership, however that's defined within an organization, that they support, sponsor, and understand what needs to be done to improve their data situation. So,
and how are they educated as to what needs to be done?
Well, that education's not going to happen on its own either. So there needs to be somebody in the organization who can connect the dots for them so they can understand the challenges of things that they'd like to be able to do that they can't do, or things they even thinking outside the box. Organizations, one of their most valuable assets these days is what they know about their customers, about their products, about their cases, about jurisdiction, all of those types of things. And the information that's available about that to help people to make decisions is not governed unless there is a focused activity to do that. So you hear the term silos of data. Well, if we can't make decisions based on the data that's available to us, we're going to be working with one hand tied behind our back. And for attorneys, I wouldn't think that would be a good idea.
Right. Generally not. So that to me means you have silos and they either need to be connected or they have to be de-siloed. Am I about right on that?
You're right on that. But even the silos of data, if the quality of the data is not good and people don't have confidence in that data, or it's taking them a long time to be able to find the data, it's not going to be as valuable to them as if they did trust the data and they did know where to go to get that data and they did have the confidence in the data.
So for people who are new to the data management world, what is good data?
Good data is, there's a lot of different dimensions of data quality. There are some people say there's 8, some people say there's 6. It has to be complete, it has to be accurate, it has to be timely, it has to be relevant, it has to be understood. So good quality data is data that kind of covers all of those things, that it's complete, but it's also accurate and it's when you need it and those types of things.
Okay, that's a helpful baseline. I want to take a step backwards, if I could, back to the law firm engagement. What are the 3 steps that you did at the very beginning?
The first thing I did was I assessed the organization against industry best practices that had been tailored to what they wanted and what they needed.
And what was the industry in that case?
The industry was practicing law.
Okay.
And so we met with individuals throughout the organization to ask them where they were in comparison to these best practices. So there were things that they were doing presently. They were already governing informally. So there were things that could be leveraged, but there was also opportunity for improvement. So what I did was I took the results of the assessment and turned it into a roadmap for them of the specific actions that they needed to follow. They needed to stand up an executive level, or at least get their steering committee, their executive level of the organization, to understand why this was important. They needed to set up a strategic level of the organization. So there were a lot of recommendations that came out of the assessment. The roadmap was the second piece. The third piece was really one of the most important pieces of the puzzle, which was creating roles and responsibilities. What do we mean by providing an owner of the data or a steward of the data? And what's the role of information technology in the management of the data? So the 3 most important things that I typically would deliver would be an assessment, a roadmap, an operating model of roles and responsibilities. And then because data and the focus on data, it was so new within the practice, we also created a communication plan to help people to understand the value of what was being put into place.
So the roadmap was starting where and ending where? What was the road?
The roadmap was basically starting from where they were and trying to recognize what levels of governance were already taking place, and actually trying to, because they had a lot of rules, RULES, that were defined. People didn't know the rules, they didn't follow the rules. So it was the beginning was take them from the level of governance that they were at to a level where it was just kind of built into what they do. So it wasn't something that they were thinking about specifically with every action that they took. They recognized that they're using data, and that's data is sensitive a certain way, that there's certain rules that need to be followed in order to protect that data. So that's the beginning is, okay, start from where you are, but get to the point where this is just built into what you do.
All right. So that sounds to me like you kind of do a gap analysis against best practices and then close the gap.
That was a much quicker way of saying what I said, yes.
I'm just going to go with a more different way of saying what you said. So now we've done that. Now we have the roadmap. And at the end of the roadmap, how was success defined?
Well, one of the recommendations that came out of the assessment is that they needed somebody in the organization to manage this, to administer governance. And that was one of the biggest wins out of it, was that they ended up hiring somebody following the recommendation. Because again, the person that I was working for had this grand idea that this was necessary for the firm, but they didn't have the time or the knowledge to administer the program, to start from the beginning, to define the roles and responsibilities, but then to orient everybody and onboard everybody so that they understood that they play a role with the data.
Is there a way to summarize what they could do at the end of the project that they couldn't do at the beginning?
They could communicate a heck of a lot better around their data.
Which
meant that if somebody had a question around the data or somebody was using data improperly, that there was a way to resolve those issues, and that that they knew who the right person was to go to when they had a question. And that there were committees set up to improve the quality of the data around specific domains. They had no formal practices before. They were all informal practices, which meant that, getting the right person to do the right thing at the right time was not easy, and it didn't happen normally.
Okay, so that's the problem with just kind of organic informality then, right?
It is.
So at the end of the project, they kind of had a better understanding of how to implement best practices.
Well, their senior leadership was convinced that this was necessary, that they had a challenge, because they had many challenges. Because going into it, their senior leadership wasn't aware, at least not to the level that they would take action. And the real goal was to get them to take action. One of the first actions that they took was to hire somebody, not as a consultant, but as a full-time employee to manage this effort. One of their second actions was to stand up a committee across business functions within the law firm as kind of the ultimate decision makers.
When you talk about business units within an organization that's a law firm, to me, that brings to mind some back office operations, billing, accounting, trying to figure out, expenses, revenue, have a good handle on that. And there's obviously different people and related roles that do that. So I assume that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, those are the business functions, almost any type of business. But then there was also one of the biggest issues that they had, and this might be pretty consistent across law firms, is trying to pool data together. So they had a piece of information, I think you referred to it as a matter or matter code or some type of ID. Right. And this may sound like a very simplistic problem, but in all the different systems that they had, the matter ID was inconsistent. It was defined differently. It had leading zeros or trailing spaces, and you couldn't match and merge data to pull information together. So one of the initial use cases was to say, okay, we've had this problem for years. What are the steps that we need to do to resolve this issue, to govern this data, to make this data more useful to people?
So at the law firm level, that meant sorting out the billing codes, the numbers, whatever piece of data was associated with some category. And I'm hearing that it's like if that data person was a person, the question is, are you? And you couldn't tell, right? Because I'd be either William Tanenbaum or William A. Tanenbaum or Bill Tanenbaum.
Or you would have a phone number with a leading one in the US or not a leading one, or would there be parentheses? So those types of inconsistency, that type of inconsistency happens when organizations create separate systems to have separate functions. They don't necessarily work together. There's nobody looking at the data of the systems to make sure that it's consistent with other applications within the organization. So what we did in that case was we brought together most of the stakeholders. First of all, we determined how large the problem was and to what degree they had a problem, but bringing together stakeholders to work on consistently on the best way to resolve that issue. It's basically the glue that holds together, that piece of data was the glue that pulled everything together in the organization, and the quality of that data was very poor.
Okay, so I'm just, I'm being the lawyer here on the podcast. So what you're telling me is that, it's not a trivial thing to use 4 digits or 6 digits or, a 1 before the area code. And the problem is then you can't really utilize the data because you can't properly identify it as the same data or related.
You can't connect it to, right. You can't connect it to other data, right.
Okay. So without taking that kind of baby step, which seems to be pretty much like, is the folder blue or red? It matters, right? Okay. So they sorted that out, and then they were able to, in a very technical phrase, connect the dots now, right?
At least they had a plan to begin to connect the dots, because on the surface, it sounds like a great idea. We should get every system to be consistent in how they record this information. In reality, getting to that point is very much a technology solution, right? Because you got to change the systems. You've got to teach people. It goes beyond just setting up a new business rule that says the data needs to look this way. What do we do with all the archive data? What do we do with all the historic data that we have? How do we get people to follow the rule? That's the execution and the enforcement of authority, is when you actually get people to follow the rule.
And what did happen with the archive data? What decisions were made around
it? It was still a work in progress when I had left the organization. But what they did do was they ranked the systems that had that as a specific ID within the system. And they said, these are the ones that are most important, and these are the ones that we're going to address first. And I can't recall exactly what they did with the archived systems, but they can go back. You can go back, and I think one of the things that they were considering was adding another field to their archived data. That was, again, that glue that pulled it together with other data in the organization.
That's an interesting solution. That's a very interesting solution.
Well, because you can't necessarily legally change archived data, but you can insert something that does make it easier to connect the dots.
All right. So you're putting basically a new consistent set of labels on data that has inconsistent labels
within organizations
without changing the original labels, right? It's an overlay. And then once you have the overlay, you can do analytics, you can de-silo it, you can connect the dots.
You can connect the dots. You can make decisions using data in disparate systems because you have a way to connect the dots.
Okay, this is really pretty interesting, I'm sure, for other lawyers to hear too. So we got to the point where you came in. At the end of the day, they hired someone to do something like what a CDO would do, although at a law firm appropriate organizational level. Looking ahead 5 years, let's say 3 years, what would you think needs to be done in those 3 years? Is it just operationalizing things, or is it more reorganization?
Well, I think that you hit it right on the head. It is operationalizing it, but you can't flip a switch and operationalize it across an organization all at once. It's not like turning on a light switch and, all of a sudden there's light. You need to do it incrementally. So their plan was to do it incrementally, was to work with specific parts of the organization. And then, as you think of it in terms of being a pie, start with a slice of the pie, and then incrementally expanded across the organization. So operationalizing it is a key answer to your question. That's what they decided to do, recognizing that with each group that they bring into the fold, that there could be additional challenges that need to be addressed. But they had no manner to do that before they started their formal program.
Okay, so this just shows us, and I want to kind of transition now, that since every company, even law firms, are data enabled, data driven, or data companies, given the evolution in business demands, and I don't want to do a deep dive into AI and totally distort the conversation, but what are the other trends that are driving new ways to approach and manage data?
Well, the technology is becoming incredible. I mean, even just within the last year with generative AI coming to the forefront, the results that are coming from artificial intelligence, the results that are coming from generative AI are all data dependent. If the data is not of high quality, then people are going to get the information they ask for, but it might not be information that they can trust or that they can use. So I look at artificial intelligence. I look at data mesh and data fabric, which are new buzzwords in the industry as well.
What do they mean, just before we go on? I like to keep interrupting you,
I
Bob.
never should have brought those up. And data fabric is more of a technology to bring disparate data together across the organization, where data mesh is pushing accountability for the management of that data back out to where it lives, basically.
And this is done in a virtual space? I mean, you're not building new databases, are you?
Some organizations are when it comes to data fabric, but I think it's more kind of, just to stick with the fabric analogy, it's stitching things together.
Okay. Appropriate enough. I love the textile analogies. They open it up to derivative analogies. It's great.
But artificial intelligence, and that's what, you can't have a conversation without talking about artificial intelligence these days. It is an application that uses data to help you to make decisions, to help you to complete a task. That data, just like data in a system and an application, I'm sure there's some additional nuances to it, but it has to be high quality. It has to be understood. It has to be trusted, and it needs to be protected. You know, the one thing that I hear people talk about all the time with generative AI and creating large language models within an organization is they don't want Joe Smith, in accounting, to be able to query what are all the executive salaries.
Right.
So it still needs to be controlled. There's still privacy issues. There's still security issues. There's still confidentiality issues, but there's also quality issues. So all of the same things that hold true for almost any type of data just go on a grander scale when it comes to using them with artificial intelligence.
So you and I had a talk just about what you were doing. So what have you done with, ChatGPT as a basis to get better answers?
You know what? I am a fan of things like ChatGPT because I think they can be really valuable. I think they can augment what you are doing rather than, I hate the idea of students having their papers or professionals having their papers written by artificial intelligence. But they can give you ideas of things that you may not have thought about by connecting dots. I've always said about things like generative AI and large language models, they're not going to replace people. But the people that know how to use them, they're the ones that are going to replace people. So if you think your job's in jeopardy because of things like artificial intelligence and generative AI, learn how to use them to help to improve the quality and the value of your work rather than replacing the work that you do.
So back to you for a second. Okay, so you wanted to do something using ChatGPT. I'm just going to call it as an engine to get to what you wanted to use. And you did something with data because I think you know a little bit about data. So we'll grant that. So what did you do that might teach others how to make ChatGPT a more reliable sets about?
What did I do? Well, a lot of being able to use these types of products successfully, and I would think that these would be the same. This would be the same. It would be the same for law firms and for lawyers, is knowing how to ask the question to get the answer that you are looking for.
Okay, so that's the prompt engineering.
It's the prompt engineering part of it. And, you can study that and you can learn from experience of the types of answers that it's giving you. First of all, large language models and things like ChatGPT can, with the term that's being used is they can hallucinate. They can pull together information that's not meant to be pulled together, and it can draw conclusions that are not accurate. So you can't just use it verbatim and what it tells you. You need to go and you need to, augment that as well if you're trying to solve a problem using those types of tools. So the one thing that I learned over time was, and I guess you would call it prompt. What did you call it? Prompt?
I called it prompt engineering because
prompt engineering. Well, there's a lot of people who talk about that because I have found that if I have a specific question or that I want to write something very quickly, using some information that I'm providing to the engine, it does a pretty good job. It's a time saver. It also creates unique ideas. Like I said, it's there to augment, not replace.
Right. So in an indirect way, we're saying that artificial intelligence is really augmented intelligence when you get to utility.
And some people will say there's no such thing as artificial intelligence because it's all coming from somewhere. But augmented intelligence, okay. I like that. We should go out and trademark it.
I don't know any trademark lawyers, but let me know if you do.
I disagree. I think you do know them.
So, if I wanted to use ChatGPT, how would I give it better data to
There's
look at?
So many things that you can do. I have created almost like a mini large language model based on non-invasive data governance. And I've fed it a lot of information that it will then use to give me different ways of thinking of things that I've already done even.
Okay.
And so you can also train.
So you're building your own, or at least fine tuning your own large language.
And you can also, again, the prompt engineering is really important because if you don't ask it for specifically what you want, it's going to give you what it thinks you want. And the other thing is too, if you ask ChatGPT just in general who I am, it will tell you that I've written books that I haven't written, that I have certification that I don't have. And you can correct it. And then within your own little conversation with it, it will keep that knowledge. But you have to check what it's telling you. You can't trust it at face value. Like I said, it's just augmenting your work. It's not replacing your work.
So now we're back to data quality, basically, right?
Isn't everything? I wrote an article that I published yesterday that people should go and look at. It's called The Dilution of Data Quality, where the term data quality is being thrown around quite a bit, but organizations aren't focusing on it from an organizational perspective. They're focusing on it on a one-off. Okay, we're going to solve this problem. We're going to solve this problem. We're going to solve this problem. But there's not programs that are being put in place to focus on data quality.
And just to be clear, by programs, you don't mean software applications. You mean business practices, right?
Correct.
So is this published through Dataversity, or where do people find it?
I published it on LinkedIn, actually. So people can connect to me on LinkedIn and find it very easily.
All right. Well, that's good to know. I mean, I've read your articles. I don't want to give you an endorsement here, but I would read them again. Let's just leave it that way. I find them very illuminating. We talked before about, to make data useful, you want to be able to derive insights. You want to make useful predictions that are actually actionable, that you can take action on. And you want to have a good model, right? So I'm trying to kind of, in my own way, kind of summarize why you're doing what you're doing to the data, because it doesn't manage itself, and a pure data set is wonderful, but you actually want to be able to take some actions based on it.
Okay, so the question there was,
is that a good idea, and how do you get there?
Well, I happen to have some magic pixie dust on my shelf over here in my office that you just sprinkle it over the organization and it solves problems. No, that's not the case. The fact is that especially with law firms, because I'm finding law firms are, I don't want to say just starting to recognize the value of data as an asset to what they do, because they've been using data as an asset forever and ever. It's just that they have challenges and they're willing to accept the challenges and not resolve the challenges. And now organizations are starting to say, you know what? If we can set ourselves apart from our competition, if we manage and govern our data better, if we can use the data to provide insights into, who are our most profitable clients? What are the most profitable services that we provide? you can get answers to those questions with data that you pull from here and there, but to pull that data consistently in a way that you have confidence in the data to actually make important business decisions is what's driving this, especially within law firms. And law firms are very competitive with each other. How do you differentiate yourself from another law firm? By improving the quality and the value of the data and how we can use data to make decisions and provide better business outcomes. That's why law firms are, I hate to say, jumping on the bandwagon. I think they've been on the bandwagon, but they've been in the back now. They're coming into the central part of the bandwagon. But I believe there's huge opportunities for law firms to use data that they, like I said earlier, and like you said, law firms are data companies, are data organizations. Everything you do is based on your data. Think to yourself about what you can't do because you don't have the data or don't have the confidence in the data to be able to do it. And then think about what you would be able to do if in a utopian environment you had access to and you had confidence in all the data that you were using. Realize that you're not going to get from point A to point B on your own. That pixie dust doesn't really exist. I'm sold out of it. But it takes work. And one of those first steps that organizations are recognizing is put somebody in charge of the data. Whether it's a chief data officer, chief data analytics officer. I'm also, in my spare time, I'm a faculty member at Carnegie Mellon University here in Pittsburgh, and their chief data officer certificate program.
Oh, speak to that a little bit about that. What skills do these people?
These people come out with the skills that are necessary to be a chief data officer, to how to communicate properly, to recognize the appropriate use of technology, how to work with their C-level people within their organizations, to develop a plan, to develop a strategy, and to execute on that strategy. Okay, but like I said, with law firms, some of them are starting to recognize that the data situation will not improve unless they have kind of a top data person, somebody to lead the charge. And that's a huge step.
So do you have a sense of how prevalent it is among law firms to have hit that stage? And you may not. I know that there are a lot of law firms.
There's a lot of law firms. I've had conversations with several. It's only like within the last year and a half that I worked with the first law firm that I worked with. And I worked with them for some time, but they brought on an excellent person who not only was a good student of the things that I was teaching them, but also took the initiative to go and research better ways of doing things.
Well, this has been a great podcast. And I think that the focus on, how law firms can use data and what they need to do in order to manage it has been really good. So I just want to give you the opportunity to ask yourself a question I should have asked, or I don't know, am I missing any key element of better data management?
I'd like
that we
to leave people
here?
with a couple different concepts. And the first one was one that you mentioned very early on, and I use it a lot in the presentations I give and even talking to my clients, that the data will not govern itself. So if you have challenges, don't expect them to resolve on their own. So it's going to take an effort, and it's going to be people that are going to be, there needs to be somebody to lead the effort. There needs to be somebody that can communicate with people to help improve data literacy or understanding and usefulness of data across an organization. So that's the one thing, is the data won't govern itself. The metadata, the documentation of the data, it won't govern itself either. The other thing that I want to leave with people is that pretty much everybody in your organization is a steward of the data. If you don't know what that means, what it really means is that they have a relationship to the data. If they are held formally accountable for that relationship to the data as a definer of the data, the producer of the data, or even as a user of the data, they're a steward of the data. We can't solve problems like data in a large, complicated organization with Band-Aids. With Band-Aids. You can't apply a Band-Aid.
Okay.
There needs to be a more holistic effort, or at least those organizations that are doing it well are taking more holistic approaches to implementing governance and data management, because they recognize they're data companies. That's one of the first and foremost things about them. They are a data. Everything you do, there's data behind it.
Well, I'm going to leave it there because I think that's where you start, that's where you finish, and that's what you do along the way. So, Bob, this has really been great to have you. And I'm going to go read that article because I know, like the other ones, it'll probably be pretty insightful.
People should feel free to reach out to me. I love having conversations like this. So if anybody's interested in learning about how they can leverage their data better within their law firm, within their practice, don't hesitate. Reach out to me through you or directly through LinkedIn. I'm happy to have these conversations.
Well, that's great. And I'm happy to have you given us kind of the roadmap to the roadmap, shall we say.
Thanks, sir.
So that's great. So, Bob, thanks very much. And look forward to having you back as technology goes. And I think we'll be in a year talking about internal large language models and how that connects with data management. So that's the prediction I'm going to leave it on. Thanks very much.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to AI and Data Law, part of the PLI Evercurrent podcast. Please note that the views and opinions expressed in this podcast represent those of the host and individuals being interviewed, and not necessarily those of PLI. For more AI-related content from the Practicing Law Institute, visit pli.edu/AIPod.